I'm Dr. Serena, and I am a veterinarian, and I'm going to show you something that I found on social media. And we're just going to kind of talk about this a little bit because it's definitely something that's important. So here's Zak George. Zak George is a dog trainer. As you can see, he is quite popular.
So CNN wants to interview me about Governor Kristi Noem. She's the sitting governor in South Dakota. And in a book that she has coming out, there's an excerpt that's making news where she boasts of having to, trigger warning here, where she boasts of shooting her pet dog, a 14-month-old German pointer, wire-haired pointer. And she defends it. Not only does she talk about this, not in a way that is remorseful, but in a way that is, I had to do it because it had to be done. This is how you know I am a leader. And CNN wanted me to comment on this, and I'm going to show you the interview.
Well, joining us now is dog trainer Zak George, host of Zak George's Dog Training Revolution.
And I have to say, Laura, before you bring Zak in, my dog was partly trained by Zak when he was a puppy. He's a hunting dog as well, and they're tough, they're difficult, but they're great dogs. They can be trained. Welcome to the show, Zak.
Oh, this is a special moment.
Thank you.
I love this. Well, listen,
Thank you. No, I appreciate that.
Go ahead, Zak.
Go ahead. Oh, yeah.
Don't do this like traffic stopping. You go.
Yeah, I'm glad you found value in the dog training videos. I make free videos for everyone out there to learn from on YouTube. Just look me up, Zak George.
I love that. Well, listen, I wonder from your perspective, when you hear that this 14-month-old wire-haired pointer, beautiful dogs, by the way, was out of her mind with excitement, chasing birds on the hunt, attacking chickens. I wonder what you made of that.
This is an astonishing story, to say the least. The behavior described here is very typical adolescent behavior out of a dog that's been selectively bred to have endless stamina and endurance. And it really speaks to the fact that the general public is deeply confused about dog behavior and how to treat them. That's something we advocate for a lot on my social media to try and help educate the public around modern humane treatment of dogs.
So let's just pause there. So when we're talking about dog training and the modernization of dog training, and what we want to do is follow what's called the humane hierarchy. I'll just show you what the humane hierarchy actually looks like. So here's one version of it. So at the top we have the wellness and nutritional and physical, and then antecedent arrangement. And that's prior to anything when it comes to the operant conditioning portion. So we're checking out to make sure that they're nutritionally and physically sound, and then setting them up for success. That's where the antecedent arrangement comes in, and that's what Zak is mentioning here.
And she says that she put the dog around other older dogs in a hunting setting to teach her how to behave.
Not all dogs are going to live through social facilitation. Not only that, but if you take an exuberant adolescent dog who cannot regulate their own emotions and they're way too excited, they won't actually learn because their arousal state is up here, and in order for them to learn, they need to be less in their limbic state where they're like, I need to chase and run and grab and bite, and bring them down into an actual emotional regulation in order to learn.
She talks about using an electronic collar, but then at the same time, she calls the dog untrainable.
So we already talked about electronic collars. So for example, let's say for instance this report, so this is 2021, dogs are more pessimistic if their owners are using 2 or more aversives. So shock collars, electronic collars, e-collars, I've heard them call them hunting collars. All of those ones are punishment-based scenarios where they're trying to train their dog based on punishment. Dogs trained using coercive methods like shock collar, prong collar, that sort of thing, may also have a more negative mood state. Often, not always, but this can lead to an increase in aggression, as Zak is about to say.
I mean, when you hear that, I mean, do you get the sense that she really tried her level best to actually train this dog?
I don't know what her personal best would be, but yeah,
It's just sort of funny because he's so diplomatic about it.
there are many more appropriate ways to train dogs than that, especially with electric collars and aversive methods like this that rely on pain, fear, and intimidation. Those are strong.
I think a lot of people don't realize that when they are using a shock collar, they've tried it on themselves, that they don't feel like it's causing any physical pain, but there can be emotional conflict. So if a dog is excited and chasing after a prey species and then it gets shocked, and in that moment they can be confused about what's going on, and it can actually stimulate their arousal higher and be going more towards the prey versus actually pausing and returning back to an owner. And that definitely has to do with the inability for people to train appropriately when they are actually using aversive methods.
Strongly correlated with increased aggression in dogs. Now,
so he's talking about how if you are using aversive methods, that you can increase the aggression in dogs, and we definitely know that that's the case. Other things that you might want to look up here. So this one is a 2020 dog training methods matter, and that there's a negative impact on welfare when you're using aversive based methods. And this one talks about how if you are reward based versus mixed. So mixed would be that you're using both. Those would be all of our balance trainers. They would be in the mixed group. And then aversive methods only, that would be something like the dog daddy. He's only using aversive methods, really.
You know, many members of the public don't realize that. That's one of the big problems, that collars like electric collars and prong collars and choke chains are used aggressively to suppress behavior. But one of the things we're trying to raise awareness about is the fact that there are so many side effects, and there's nothing that can't be trained with positive reinforcement training. And
speaking from a former zookeeper who has used protective contact, so protective contact just means that I have a barrier between myself and a carnivorous animal like lions, tigers, bears. And I'm training through positive reinforcement to shift animals. You might be training them to have blood draws, that sort of thing, for injections. And you have a barrier, so you can't use physical punishment in order to train through a barrier. You only can use positive reinforcement. Now, if I can train a tiger to lie down, then somebody can train their dog through positive reinforcement. And whether or not they need to put in a physical barrier, it's possible. Highly unlikely if you actually got your dog from a reputable breeder and you started training them when they were, somewhere between 8 and 14 weeks of age.
And the good thing about positive reinforcement training and responsible management of the dog's environment, which was also lacking in this case.
So responsible management, I mean, we sort of talked about when we are trying to set up for success, we want to use the humane hierarchy. So the humane hierarchy, we're starting with wellness, nutrition, physical ailments first. And then we have antecedent arrangement. And that's the whole portion, is that comes way before any operant learning. also comes before any classical conditioning as well.
This really is what people need to, because it doesn't have the side effects. This is what more people need to be aware of.
As she writes in her book, this idea that maybe she finds all this conversation quite naive and thinks that hard choices are made. You just don't understand what it's like. I think she references farm life in particular, and the idea of having to make tough decisions.
So I grew up on a farm, so I actually know what farm life is. The only time that my dad had to take it upon himself in order to put an animal down was when one of my ewes gave birth and had a prolapsed uterus. So in order to end pain and suffering, that was a procedure that he deemed was necessary. In her particular case, again, we weren't there, but chances are that when she's using sort of like a split-second decision that she's going to put this dog down, that she's not really in her thinking brain, she's more in her limbic system. We've been talking a lot about emotional dysregulation in people. If you've seen the discourse on TikTok, it basically says that you as the human should be able to regulate your own emotions as an adult human. And if you have not been able to regulate your own emotions, that you should be looking inward and figuring out, why is this causing me to be triggered?
On farms in different parts of the country. What do you make of that? Because I'm sure there are people who are listening and thinking it's a dog, which is certainly not my opinion of the matter. But what do you say to people who look at this issue and...
So dogs are considered chattel in most states. Some people will call their dog part of their family. I mean, I certainly do. I call my pets my fur babies. But there are plenty of people that, dogs are property. I mean, similarly, women and Black people used to be property as well.
Think that we're being naive.
So we had some technical difficulty at the end, but what I wanted to say there was I have to wonder if it is not considered a crime to shoot a dog in South Dakota. I don't
live in the States, but these things we can actually find. So what are the rules around gun laws? So gun laws in South Dakota, and you have here that South Dakota actually has weak gun laws, so it's considered one of the national failures in the category of gun law strength. There is a high proportion of suicide via gunshot. It's higher than the national average. South Dakota has no foundational gun laws, and so they also have what's called shoot first law. So if you're curious about kind of what that means, is that many states have a condition in which if someone steps onto your property and you feel like you have to protect your property, you feel like you are being attacked, that it's basically shoot first, ask questions later. And there have been some young adults and teens that have been shot because they accidentally rang the wrong doorbell, or they accidentally stepped onto the wrong driveway. And unfortunately, that is the case in South Dakota, is that there are no real regulations as far as is it a criminal act. As far as like gun laws go, and that's actually why I wanted my husband to be part of this, but he's got a few other things going on. But he is very interested in the politics of the United States. But if you take a look here, 80% of all gun deaths in South Dakota are via suicide. The sad part of this statistic here about firearms in children. So firearms are the third leading cause of death among children and teens in South Dakota. That 54% of deaths are by suicide. On average, 11 children and teens die by gunshot, and that 58% of all deaths among children and teens are homicide, which is kind of sad. The other flip side of it is that if you go to the AVMA, so the American Veterinary Medical Association, you're going to find the guidelines on humane euthanasia. And for companion animals, gunshot is considered an acceptable method for euthanasia, but with the caveat that the gunshot should only be performed by highly skilled personnel that are trained in the use of firearms. That is animal control officers, law enforcement officers, and properly trained veterinarians. So I myself, I actually took a course. I did my PAL, which is your possession and acquisition license. That's what you need in Canada in order to carry a firearm. I don't own any firearms, but in order for, let's say, for instance, we come into a scenario where there was a trailer where there was a bunch of pigs inside the trailer, and they got into a horrific accident where there was a lot of wounds, and the individual who was teaching our course is a veterinarian, a large animal veterinarian, and he had to euthanize several of these pigs due to severe injuries. And you got into a situation where the police officers were overwhelmed with the number that needed to be euthanized, and that they needed a veterinarian to go in and determine which ones needed to be euthanized. So in those scenarios, he had to use firearms in order to euthanize a whole lot of pigs in that accident. When it comes to euthanasia, you're trying to relieve pain and suffering for that individual. If there's some sort of what's called imminent danger to human life, highly doubtful for a 14-month-old pointer who sounds like it's just exuberant and wants to hunt, which is what they're trained to do, or bred to do, I should say. But when it comes to humane euthanasia by gunshot, there is a way that you have to do it in order to be sure that the euthanasia is quick and as painless as possible. And so if you take a look here, this would be how you're going to euthanize. So X marks the spot. So in this cow, you can see that it's the pole. So the pole is where the horns come out, and you basically draw a line from the right pole down to the lateral aspect of the left eye, and vice versa. You're drawing a line from your left pole down to the lateral aspect of the right eye, and that X makes the spot where you actually are supposed to aim. Now, if you're imagining trying to aim at an exuberant dog who is otherwise healthy, who is likely not sedated prior to, I highly doubt that she has such a good shot that she was able to aim for the X marks the spot. Highly doubt that.
I don't know. I know in most parts of the country that I'm aware of, I'm under the impression it is considered animal cruelty. And what's troubling is that she really details in the book, and if you're interested in this, you can read this, but she almost makes it clear that she does it as an in-the-moment decision. As a first line, even if we are dealing with a serious case of aggression here, that doesn't make sense. Behavioral euthanasia may be an option for...
So with behavioral euthanasia, if you are not able to physically handle the animal, there are oral sedatives that you give to them in order to make them handleable.
Some dogs From what I heard here, that wasn't necessarily the case. There was a failure to control the environment, and as I mentioned in the video, she was using aversive dog training methods, which are clearly correlated with increased aggression. I'm not saying that's definitely what happened here, but it is definitely a known cause of increased aggression in dogs. So this to me is shocking. You would expect someone, if they were going to tell this story, to be more reverent about it. But to celebrate this and to portray this as an act of courage, and that's why you should vote for me and keep me in office in South Dakota. If I'm a citizen of South Dakota, I'm going to insist on an investigation here to understand if this was legal or not. I mean, we can start there.
So because she shot her own dog and likely on her own property, it's not going to end up being something that's considered animal cruelty, unless we had witnesses that she was causing undue distress. I don't think that she's going to end up having any sort of repercussions based on that.
So I think it would really speak volumes if the appropriate authorities looked into the matter and investigated it in South Dakota for a start. But what do you all think? I can only imagine that the breeder of this dog that was shot and killed by the government.
And we also have to think that there's probably more unethical breeders than there are ethical breeders. So despite the fact that there's probably something when the breeder signs off a contract for a dog, that there's not a lot of them that will bring the dog back.
Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota must be devastated by this news. I know that generally speaking, breeders have an agreement with people who purchase their dogs that if you're having any issues.
I think that if we did find out who their breeder was, probably the only thing that they would have an issue with is for when we say there's nature and there's nurture, and that dogs who are genetically predisposed to aggression shouldn't be bred. I think that's the only side that the breeder would be interested in.
Issues, or you decide not to keep the dog, you should. I have the first right of refusal to take that dog back as the breeder. And this is just one of the many options that are typically available to people who are struggling with their dog for one reason or another, or don't want to make the necessary commitment to pursue the knowledge to adequately train that dog or control that dog's environment. So I don't know who the breeder is. I'm hoping that some of you might be able to look into it and touch base with me. Again, I have no reason. I empathize with the breeder. I think, quality breeders put a lot of time and effort into making sure that they responsibly breed good dogs.
So if it is a reputable breeder who is an ethical breeder who looks to make sure that their dogs are emotionally sound, then it all comes down to how this dog was raised. So between that 8 to 14 week window is when you have the most ability to influence your dog's behavior. And so if this individual is training using some methods and then had some sort of expectation that this dog should be emotionally regulated, but was using collars in order to try and train, or using the influence of other dogs to train your dog, when they are emotionally dysregulated, they cannot learn. And part of learning to train dogs is to be able to recognize when they are in a high state of arousal that you, the human, are going to have a minimal ability to get that dog to emotionally regulate. That you need to be training below their emotional threshold not their physical threshold where they are already acting, but below their emotional threshold where they start to say, I think that this is way too exciting and I can't control myself, so I'm going to zoom around and start going after chickens and getting too excited. So that's pretty much all I had to say. I kind of wanted my husband to pitch in his ideas on the gun control, the political stance, the political avenue, because I'm not interested in politics, but he is. As always, I'm open to your comments and questions, and I like to have questions from my audience, and I certainly will address them in future videos.